In the remote hollows of Appalachian Tennessee, where autumn mist clings to mountainsides like secrets refusing to surface, stands a place that locals still whisper about in 1886. Cove Creek Hollow was a community where God-fearing families trusted their moral leaders without question, where a man's devotion to Scripture made him beyond suspicion. The story I'm about to tell you involves two sisters who discovered a truth so horrifying about their beloved brother that it transformed them from victims into something far more dangerous. What drove these young women to chain a trusted community leader in an abandoned barn for 12 agonizing days? How did a man who read Scripture to his neighbors become the target of such calculated vengeance? And what investigators found carved into those barn walls revealed confessions that defied every assumption about this family's wholesome reputation. The sisters' terrifying revenge exposed secrets that had festered in isolation for years, but the justice they delivered will challenge everything you believe about right and wrong. Prepare yourself for what's coming next, because what these sisters endured and what they did about it will leave you questioning the very nature of family, faith, and justice. October 1886 brought an unseasonably cold morning to Carter County when Sheriff Ezra Whitman unfolded a letter that would shatter his understanding of one of Tennessee's most respected mountain families. Reverend Marcus Townsend's trembling handwriting described 3 nights of unnatural screams echoing from the abandoned Hensley tobacco barn, sounds that made his horse refuse to approach the property and left him praying until dawn. The Methodist preacher's account, later preserved as evidence document number 1 in Carter County court records, contained a disturbing detail that would haunt investigators for decades. The screams weren't random, but followed a deliberate pattern, as if someone was timing intervals of suffering. Silas Hensley commanded reverence throughout Cove Creek Hollow as the community's unofficial spiritual leader, a 34-year-old bachelor who possessed the rare gift of biblical literacy in a region where most residents couldn't read their own names. His Sunday gatherings drew families from 15 miles away, desperate for spiritual guidance in the unforgiving Appalachian wilderness, where death stalked every winter and salvation seemed as distant as the nearest town. Sheriff Whitman's preliminary investigation notes, filed October 21, 1886, recorded testimonies from 8 different neighbors who described Silas as God's chosen vessel and a man who never spoke harsh words. But hidden within these glowing character references lay disturbing inconsistencies that experienced lawmen recognized as red flags demanding deeper scrutiny. Sarah Mullins, the Hensley family's closest neighbor, living 2 miles down the hollow, provided Sheriff Whitman with the first concrete evidence that something sinister festered beneath Silas's righteous facade. Her sworn statement, recorded in the sheriff's investigation ledger, revealed that neither Mercy nor Charity Hensley had attended a single community gathering, church service, or seasonal celebration in over 4 years. When pressed for details about the girl's appearance during her brief encounters, Sarah's testimony took a disturbing turn. Both sisters displayed obvious facial deformities and developmental delays that suggested either severe malnutrition or something far more troubling. Silas's explanation for their condition, documented in multiple witness statements, claimed the girls suffered from mountain fever, requiring complete isolation from healthy families. The pattern of suspicious behavior surrounding the Hensley household emerged gradually as Sheriff Whitman conducted methodical interviews with every merchant, neighbor, and traveler who'd encountered the family. Store owner Thomas Bradley's sales records, preserved in the county courthouse archives, showed Silas purchasing increasingly large quantities of rope, metal chains, and padlocks beginning in 1883, items that served no apparent purpose on a tobacco farm. When questioned about these unusual purchases, Bradley's documented response revealed Silas claimed he was securing livestock from mountain cats, despite neighbors confirming the family owned no cattle or horses. The timeline of these purchases corresponded exactly with other disturbing developments that painted a picture of escalating control and concealment. Tabitha Hensley's sudden death in 1883 raised immediate suspicions among community members who'd grown accustomed to her regular appearances at Methodist camp meetings and seasonal gatherings. Dr. Samuel Garrett's medical inquiry, conducted 2 weeks after Sheriff Whitman opened the investigation, uncovered the shocking fact that no physician had been summoned to attend Tabitha during her final illness, despite Silas possessing sufficient wealth to afford medical care. Sarah Mullins's testimony revealed that Tabitha had been buried within hours of her death, with Silas refusing to allow neighbors to view the body or participate in traditional mourning rituals. The grave marker in the family cemetery bore only Tabitha's name and year of death, omitting the customary biblical verse or personal sentiment that mountain families considered essential for proper Christian burial. The investigation took a darker turn when Sarah Mullins recalled a confrontation from 1884 that had been dismissed at the time as typical family defensiveness. Her documented account described approaching Silas about the girls' education, suggesting they might benefit from basic schooling with other mountain children despite their supposed illness. Silas's reaction, preserved in the sheriff's notes, involved violent threats and accusations that Sarah was interfering with God's plan for his household. The intensity of his response to innocent inquiries about child welfare struck experienced investigators as the desperate reaction of someone protecting dangerous secrets. Multiple witnesses confirmed that Silas's normally calm demeanor transformed into rage whenever anyone mentioned his sisters, suggesting psychological pressure that couldn't be explained by ordinary family privacy. Reverend Townsend's complete testimony, recorded during a formal deposition at the Carter County Courthouse, provided the crucial evidence that transformed suspicious circumstances into probable cause for immediate investigation. The Methodist preacher's account detailed witnessing 2 young women dragging something heavy wrapped in canvas toward the barn while Silas attended a neighbor's tobacco harvest 3 miles away. His description of their movements suggested deliberate purpose rather than routine farm work, and his documentation of the precise timing proved the sisters possessed both opportunity and capability for independent action. The screams that followed lasted exactly 3 days, ending abruptly on the morning Silas returned home, creating a timeline that would later prove essential in establishing premeditation and conscious planning. Sheriff Ezra Whitman's 2-day journey through treacherous Appalachian terrain to reach Cove Creek Hollow in late October 1886 would test both his physical endurance and mental preparation for what awaited investigation. Accompanied by Deputy Tom Bradley and Dr. Samuel Garrett, the lawman carried a formal search warrant signed by Circuit Judge William Morrison, legal authority that granted them access to examine every structure on the Hensley property. The 23-mile trek through mountain paths barely wide enough for horses required overnight camping in freezing temperatures, but Dr. Garrett's medical equipment and the sheriff's evidence collection tools made the arduous journey essential for proper investigation. Their approach to the isolated homestead revealed immediate signs of disturbance, fresh wagon tracks leading directly to the notorious tobacco barn, and an unnatural silence that made their horses skittish and alert. The abandoned barn yielded its horrific secrets within minutes of the investigators' arrival, as Deputy Bradley's systematic search uncovered heavy iron chains and shackles still radiating warmth from recent human contact. Sheriff Whitman's investigation notes, preserved in Carter County Archives as Evidence File No. 7, documented the precise positioning of restraints that suggested prolonged imprisonment rather than temporary confinement. The metal showed signs of desperate struggle, with dried blood coating the edges where someone had fought against the bindings with enough violence to tear flesh. Dr. Garrett's immediate medical assessment of the physical evidence concluded that whoever had been restrained in these shackles had endured at least 10 days of captivity based on the wear patterns and biological residue. The discovery of a wooden bucket containing human waste and food scraps confirmed that someone had been deliberately kept alive in this makeshift prison, fed just enough to prevent death while maximizing suffering. Mercy Hensley's immediate confession upon seeing the investigators emerged not as remorse, but as fierce justification that chilled experienced lawmen accustomed to mountain violence. Her exact words, recorded in Deputy Bradley's field notes, carried no shame or regret. He deserved worse than we gave him, and the Lord knows it true. The 18-year-old's demeanor during questioning displayed disturbing composure, as if she'd rehearsed her defense for months before this moment arrived. When asked about Silas's whereabouts, Mercy's response indicated premeditation that transformed the investigation from missing person case to probable homicide. She directed officers to examine the barn's far corner where the devil finally received his judgment. Her willingness to provide detailed information suggested either complete mental breakdown or calculated confidence that her actions would be understood once the full truth emerged. Charity Hensley's written confession, later filed as Court Record Number 847-1886, contained revelations that shocked investigators familiar with the worst examples of mountain family dysfunction. The 16-year-old's barely literate handwriting spelled out accusations that redefined the entire investigation. He used us as wives since we turned 14 and made us birth his babies like we was his livestock. Her statement included specific dates and locations that investigators could verify, transforming abstract allegations into concrete evidence of systematic sexual abuse spanning 4 years. The confession detailed Silas's method of control through religious manipulation, quoting his claims that Bible fathers took daughters when God commanded, and that isolation from community was necessary to maintain their holy household. Charity's account provided the missing motive that explained why 2 supposedly devoted sisters would imprison their beloved brother with such calculated cruelty. The family Bible discovered in Silas's private chamber contained physical evidence that corroborated the sisters' most shocking allegations while revealing the full scope of his methodical deception. Birth records written in Silas's own hand showed impossible dates that placed the sisters' conception when their supposed mother Tabitha was 52 years old, an age that made natural pregnancy highly unlikely given mountain women's typical health conditions. The margins of biblical passages contained Silas's handwritten justifications for his actions, including references to Abraham's household and Lot's daughters that twisted Scripture to support incestuous relationships. Pressed wildflowers marked specific verses that Silas had used to manipulate his victims, creating a documented trail of religious rationalization that proved premeditation rather than impulsive sin. Dr. Garrett's analysis of the ink and paper confirmed that these notations had been added over several years, showing escalating justification as Silas's crimes expanded in scope and frequency. Dr. Garrett's medical examination of both sisters provided scientific evidence that supported their testimonies while revealing additional horrors that even their confessions had understated. His official report, filed with the Carter County Court, documented clear physical signs of inbreeding, including facial deformities, developmental delays, and bone structure abnormalities consistent with children born from closely related parents. The examination revealed that both sisters had recently given birth, with Mercy showing signs of delivery within the past 6 months and Charity within the previous year. When questioned about the whereabouts of these infants, both sisters remained silent, their expressions suggesting knowledge of additional crimes that investigators had yet to uncover. Dr. Garrett's professional opinion, recorded in his medical assessment, concluded that the sisters' physical and mental development had been severely compromised by their parentage, creating circumstances that would profoundly affect their capacity for normal moral reasoning and emotional response to their traumatic circumstances. Mercy Hensley's complete testimony, recorded over 3 grueling hours at the Carter County Courthouse, revealed the precise moment when childhood innocence transformed into calculated vengeance that would consume 2 years of meticulous planning. Court Record Number 849-1886 preserved her exact words describing the discovery that shattered her world at age 16. Found grandmother's letters hidden behind loose stones in the root cellar, tied with black ribbon like funeral flowers. The hidden correspondence, written in the trembling hand of her deceased grandmother Ruth Hensley, contained revelations that redefined every relationship in the cursed household. Ruth's letters, dated between 1875 and 1878, documented her growing horror as she witnessed her son Silas's transformation from devoted caretaker to predatory master of his own mother and eventual father of his sisters. The letters provided investigators with documentary evidence that Tabitha Hensley had been Silas's first victim, not his willing partner in creating their twisted family structure. Ruth's correspondence to her sister in Virginia, preserved as evidence file number 12, described witnessing Silas taking liberties with his mother that no Christian son should contemplate, and her desperate attempts to intervene before her own death in 1879. The grandmother's detailed accounts included specific incidents, dates, and locations that corroborated the sisters' later testimonies about their father's methodical approach to controlling his household through religious manipulation and physical isolation. Ruth's final letter, written weeks before her death, contained a prophetic warning that proved tragically accurate. That boy will destroy this family with his devil's appetites, and God help the children who suffer for his sins. Tabitha Hensley's deathbed confession to neighbor Sarah Mullins in 1883 provided the crucial link between the grandmother's warnings and the sisters' eventual discovery of their true parentage. Sarah's sworn testimony, recorded in Sheriff Whitman's investigation files, preserved Tabitha's exact dying words. Told me her boy had done her wrong, made her birth children that weren't meant to be, and now those girls was paying for her sins with their own bodies. The dying woman's admission revealed that she had understood the full horror of her situation, but felt powerless to protect her daughters from inheriting her fate as Silas's victims. Her final request to Sarah, documented in the court records, was to pray that someone stronger than me finds the courage to stop him before he destroys what's left of this family's soul. The scope of horror expanded exponentially when Sheriff Whitman's systematic property search uncovered evidence of 3 small graves hidden behind the cabin, marked only with rough wooden crosses bearing no names or dates. Dr. Garrett's forensic examination of the burial sites, documented in his official medical report, confirmed that the graves contained infant remains consistent with newborn deaths occurring within the past 3 years. The positioning and depth of the graves suggested hasty burial performed by someone familiar with the property's terrain, while the absence of proper coffins or burial shrouds indicated desperate concealment rather than mourning ritual. When confronted with this evidence, Mercy's response chilled investigators. Silas said the babies was too weak for God's work, so we gave them back to the earth before they could suffer like us. Silas's personal journal, discovered hidden beneath loose floorboards in his private chamber, provided investigators with the perpetrator's own documented confession, spanning 4 years of escalating crimes against his family. The leather-bound ledger, preserved as evidence file number 15 in the Carter County Archives, contained entries written in Silas's educated handwriting that detailed his biblical household management with disturbing clinical precision. His recorded observations included tracking the sisters' physical development, noting optimal timing for breeding purposes, and calculating food rations necessary to maintain their health while preventing escape attempts. The journal entries revealed a methodical mind that viewed his family members as livestock to be managed rather than human beings deserving protection and love. The sisters' imprisonment of Silas followed a carefully orchestrated plan that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of psychological manipulation and physical restraint techniques. Mercy's detailed confession, preserved in Court Record Number 851-1886, described luring Silas to the barn under the pretense of showing him a newborn calf that required his expertise in animal husbandry. The deception exploited his trust in their submission, while positioning him in the isolated location where their revenge could unfold without community interference. Charity's role involved preparing the restraint system using chains purchased by Silas himself, creating poetic justice that investigators noted in their final report. The sisters' coordination required weeks of preparation, including stockpiling food supplies, arranging work schedules to ensure uninterrupted access to their prisoner, and developing a rotation system for guard duty. Mercy's diary entries, discovered in her bedroom and later filed as evidence document number 18, provided investigators with a day-by-day account of Father Brother's divine punishment that revealed the calculating nature of their revenge. Her recorded observations included detailed notes about Silas's physical deterioration, his desperate attempts to negotiate for freedom, and his growing realization that his victims had become his judges. The diary documented specific conversations where Silas attempted to use religious authority to command their obedience, only to be confronted with his own biblical justifications, read back to him by victims who had memorized every twisted scripture he'd used to rationalize their abuse. The entries revealed that the sisters' plan extended beyond simple imprisonment to include psychological torment designed to force Silas to experience the helplessness and terror he had inflicted on his family for years. The barn walls themselves provided the most damning evidence against Silas Hensley, as investigators discovered his desperate final confession carved into wooden beams with his own fingernails, creating a permanent record of guilt that no court testimony could refute. Sheriff Whitman's documentation, preserved as evidence file number 21, recorded every word of Silas's scratched admission. "I took my mother Tabitha as wife when father died, made her birth Mercy and Charity, who I used as my own wives since they flowered." The carved letters, gouged deep enough to draw blood from his fingertips, continued across multiple beams in increasingly frantic handwriting that chronicled his complete psychological breakdown during 12 days of imprisonment. Dr. Garrett's analysis of the scratched confessions determined that Silas had worked continuously during his final days, driven by desperation to document his crimes before death claimed him. The physical evidence surrounding Silas's death provided investigators with scientific proof that his sisters had orchestrated deliberate murder rather than accidental death during imprisonment. Dr. Garrett's autopsy report, filed as medical document number 4 with the Carter County Court, concluded that Silas died from systematic starvation combined with exposure to freezing October temperatures that dropped below 30 degrees during his final week of captivity. The positioning of his body suggested he had spent his last hours attempting to reach water that his sisters placed just beyond his chain's reach, creating psychological torture that prolonged his suffering while ensuring inevitable death. Dried tear tracks on his face, preserved by the barn's cold temperatures, indicated that Silas had wept continuously during his final days, a detail that investigators noted as evidence of the complete role reversal between predator and victim. The sisters' joint statement recorded by Deputy Bradley as they stood over Silas's corpse, provided chilling insight into their methodical planning and complete absence of remorse for their calculated revenge. Court Record Number 8, 53-1886, preserved their exact words. "We done what the law never would, and now the devil can't hurt no more children." Their calm demeanor while describing 12 days of systematic torture struck experienced lawmen as evidence of psychological transformation that changed innocent victims into efficient executioners. When asked if they understood the legal consequences of their actions, Mercy's response demonstrated their complete acceptance of whatever punishment awaited. "We knowed we'd hang or rot in prison, but some things is worth dying for, and stopping him was worth everything." The community response to the sisters' arrest revealed a disturbing pattern of willful blindness that had enabled Silas's crimes to continue undetected for years while neighbors chose silence over intervention. 8 different residents provided testimony documented in the sheriff's investigation files, admitting they had noticed the family's queer ways, but convinced themselves that interfering would violate mountain customs of family privacy. Sarah Mullins's expanded statement revealed that multiple women had discussed their concerns about the Hensley sisters' absence from community gatherings, but collectively decided that Silas's reputation as a godly man made their suspicions inappropriate. The testimonies painted a picture of a community that sacrificed vulnerable children to maintain social comfort, creating the isolation that allowed Silas's predatory behavior to flourish unchallenged. Local mill owner Jacob Crawford provided investigators with evidence of a systematic cover-up that extended beyond mere neighborly discretion into active protection of Silas's criminal enterprise. Crawford's confession, preserved in court document number 855-1886, admitted that he had suspected inappropriate relationships within the Hensley household, but chose profitable silence over moral intervention. His statement revealed that Silas had purchased lumber and hardware necessary for constructing restraints and privacy barriers, transactions that Crawford recognized as suspicious but ignored in exchange for regular payments that exceeded normal market rates. The mill owner's admission that he didn't want to interfere in family business exposed the economic incentives that helped maintain Silas's isolation and control over his victims. Sheriff Whitman's discovery of Silas's body created a crime scene that told the complete story of systematic revenge executed with methodical precision over 12 days of calculated torture. The positioning of the corpse, documented in detailed sketches preserved in the investigation files, showed Silas had died while reaching toward carved messages he had scratched into the barn's support beams during his final hours. Surrounding his body, investigators found additional written pleas for mercy, desperate promises of reform, and increasingly incoherent attempts to negotiate for freedom that revealed his complete psychological collapse. The sisters had arranged personal items from their childhood around his corpse, including torn dolls and broken toys that symbolized their stolen innocence, creating a shrine to their destroyed childhood that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of symbolic justice. The arrest of both sisters proceeded with unprecedented cooperation, as Mercy and Charity surrendered willingly, expressing relief rather than fear at the prospect of facing legal consequences for their methodical revenge. Deputy Bradley's arrest report, filed with the Carter County Sheriff's Department, documented their calm behavior during the formal charging process and their insistence that additional investigation would only reveal more evidence supporting their actions. When asked if they wished to retain legal counsel, Mercy's response demonstrated complete confidence in the righteousness of their cause. "Don't need no lawyer when the truth is carved in wood and the devil's own words prove his guilt." Their willingness to face trial without attempting escape or denial suggested either complete mental breakdown or absolute certainty that justice would recognize their actions as necessary rather than criminal. The November 1886 trial at Carter County Courthouse drew unprecedented crowds as word spread throughout Appalachian Tennessee about two sisters who had delivered biblical justice to their predatory father-brother through methodical revenge. Judge William Morrison presided over proceedings that challenged every legal precedent for handling cases where victims became executioners, creating courtroom drama that would influence Tennessee jurisprudence for decades. Both sisters entered guilty pleas to charges of unlawful imprisonment resulting in death, refusing legal counsel and insisting that the complete truth be presented to ensure their actions were understood within the full context of their suffering. Court stenographer Martha Williams documented every word of testimony that revealed the horrific scope of Silas's crimes while establishing the sisters' calculated response as desperate justice rather than mindless vengeance. The prosecution's presentation of evidence created a comprehensive record of Silas's systematic destruction of his family through years of documented sexual abuse, religious manipulation, and psychological torture that transformed innocent children into instruments of retribution. District Attorney Samuel Pierce, appointed by the Tennessee State Attorney General specifically for this complex case, presented physical evidence including Silas's carved confessions, his personal journal detailing household management, and medical testimony confirming the sisters' parentage through examination of genetic abnormalities. The prosecution's case file, preserved as Carter County Legal Archive number 112, contained over 300 pages of evidence that established Silas as a methodical predator who used isolation and religious authority to maintain complete control over his victims. Pierce's closing argument acknowledged that while the sisters' actions violated legal statutes, the extraordinary circumstances created moral justification that demanded judicial mercy rather than harsh punishment. Judge Morrison's sentencing reflected careful consideration of both legal precedent and the unprecedented nature of victims who had become their own deliverers of justice through systematic planning and execution. His written judgment, preserved in Tennessee Circuit Court records, sentenced Mercy to 3 years hard labor and Charity to 2 years, citing the younger sister's diminished mental capacity and greater dependence on Mercy's leadership during the planning phase. The judge's reasoning, documented in his official statement, emphasized that while vigilante justice cannot be sanctioned by any civilized court, these women suffered wrongs so profound that their response, though illegal, demands our understanding rather than our condemnation. His sentencing speech, recorded by court stenographer Williams, established legal precedent that Tennessee courts would reference for generations when handling cases involving family violence and victim-perpetrated justice. The community's response to the sentencing revealed a moral awakening that transformed Cove Creek Hollow's understanding of family privacy versus child protection, creating lasting changes in how mountain communities addressed domestic violence. 8 residents who had previously testified about ignoring warning signs now formed a committee dedicated to monitoring vulnerable families and reporting suspicious behavior to county authorities. Sarah Mullins, whose testimony had proved crucial in establishing the timeline of abuse, became the community's unofficial child welfare advocate, visiting isolated families and ensuring that no future victims would suffer in silence. The formation of this protective network, documented in Methodist Church records preserved at the Tennessee State Archives, represented the community's acknowledgement that their previous silence had enabled Silas's crimes and endangered innocent children. Silas Hensley's final judgment extended beyond his earthly death as the community refused consecrated burial, condemning his remains to an unmarked grave behind Carter County Courthouse that served as a permanent reminder of evil's ultimate defeat. church records from Mount Olive Methodist Church, preserved in denominational archives, documented the congregation's unanimous decision to deny burial in consecrated ground, declaring that no man who corrupts God's design for family deserves rest among the faithful. His unmarked grave, visited by investigators and legal scholars for decades afterward, contained only his remains and the community's collective rejection of his twisted interpretation of biblical authority. The site became a somber landmark where Tennessee law enforcement officials brought new deputies to understand how isolation and unchecked power could transform respected community leaders into methodical predators. The sisters' fate in Tennessee State Penitentiary for women reflected both the harshness of prison conditions and the tragic cost of their justified revenge, with institutional records documenting their divergent paths toward either redemption or destruction. Prison medical files, preserved in state archives, showed that Mercy's physical condition deteriorated rapidly under harsh labor conditions. With her inbred constitution unable to withstand the combination of manual work, inadequate nutrition, and psychological stress of incarceration. Her death from pneumonia in 1888, documented in prison mortality records, occurred after she had served 2 years of her sentence with behavior reports indicating complete acceptance of her punishment and no expressions of regret for her actions. Charity survived her full 2-year sentence, with prison records showing she learned basic literacy and expressed desire to start fresh where nobody knows the Hensley name, leading to her documented release in 1889 and subsequent journey to Colorado Territory. The lasting legacy of the Hensley case established legal precedents that influenced Tennessee courts for generations while preserving physical evidence that continues to educate law enforcement about recognizing and investigating family crimes in isolated communities. Carter County Historical Society maintains complete case files including court records, sheriff's investigation notes, medical examiner reports, and photographs of physical evidence that legal scholars and criminologists study to understand how systematic abuse can transform victims into agents of justice. The preserved barn, now known locally as Justice Barn, still displays Silas's carved confessions on wooden beams that serve as permanent testimony to his crimes and his sister's methodical revenge. This comprehensive evidence archive ensures that the story of two sisters who delivered biblical justice to their tormentor continues to serve as both warning about hidden evil and proof that truth will ultimately surface, no matter how deeply buried beneath isolation, religious manipulation, and community silence.